questions. You have a calling. In fact, you have more than one calling. Indeed, you will have various callings over the course of your lifetime. You may have callings now you didn't realize your callings. And you may have a calling or two that is yet to come. Ooh. How do you know what your calling is? How can you be sure of when it comes? And how do you know when a calling ends? Not everyone will have the same answer to those questions, and the answers aren't always obvious or clear, although they can be blessedly so from time to time. Sometimes the best way to answer hard questions is to ask good ones. What if your calling isn't what you get paid to do? What if it is? What if your calling isn't something you feel passionate about every day, or even most days? What if your calling doesn't bring you public fame or wide acclaim or much recognition at all? What if your calling is something no one sees? What if your calling didn't come roaring into your ears like thunder rolling down from the mountains, so loud it was impossible to ignore? What if instead it hovered about like a pestering fly with a low, inanimate hum? What if you still can't quite hear that call? What if your calling takes different forms over the course of your life, changing in shape, color, and size in the way an oak slowly grows from sapling to mighty timber, slipping each season from gold to green to brown to bare, all while remaining true as an oak? What if a calling is something you can hear and answer only as you journey through life? What if your calling is not an activity, but a place, a town, a city, a farm, a country? What if a calling isn't just about what you do, but how you do it? What if it isn't just about doing a certain thing, but also about being a certain way? I opt to say up front, this book is not going to tell you what your calling is, but I hope it will help show you how to discover and fulfill the various callings that unfold throughout your life. Jesus said, I am the way and the truth and the life. John 14:6. A way is a manner of going. It is the form of our lives take on this worldly journey. The Christian is called to follow the way of Jesus. And Jesus is the truth. And Jesus is all truth. And he is truth. The answers to all our questions can be seen only by his light. And in him is all the goodness this life has to offer. In him alone is the good life. And the way of Jesus is beautiful. Jesus is the true, the good, and the beautiful. All creatures made in the image of God, we are each called to pursue truth, goodness, and beauty in all of life. Only in doing this can you discern and then follow your particular vocation, that particular work God created you to do. And since we all must work, do good works within our calling, around it, and alongside it, with work we will begin. Work. Work has a bad reputation. This reputation is largely undeserved. I'm thinking of bumper stickers saying, a bad day of fishing is better than a good day at work, which I know my husband agrees with. Or find a job you love and you will never have to work a day in your life. The internet tells me this saying was originally stated by either Confucius or Mark Twain, who, along with, that sounded like the turkey baster thing. So Chris tried to teach us about breathing that'll automatically come back when you are doing that. Never had that happen except right now. That was weird. Who along with C.S. Lewis are the most commonly misattributed sources of popular quotes. These and other such sayings are rooted in an underlying assumption that work is bad, or at least unpleasant and to be avoided. Certainly, much work can be hard, whether it be paid work or simply the work required to accomplish anything difficult that we set out to achieve. Consider, though, how many ways we use the word work and the different contexts and connotations these uses of word invoke. Artists create works of art. A celebrity works the crowd. When we exercise, we work out. A knob on the radio has to be worked a bit to get the right channel. Yes, I still have and use such a radio. Recipes call for certain ingredients to be worked in. A conflict is worked through. A lunch date is something we work into our overly scheduled calendars. Our salvation, St. Paul says, must be worked out in fear and trembling. Philippians 2:12. All of these meanings suggest effort or exertion, and truly, as much as most of us would prefer a little less hustle and hurry in our lives, can you imagine a life without effort or I can't say the word now. It is as impossible as it is unimaginable. Would you even want such a life? Even in the Garden of Eden, work was a part of life. In fact, God himself worked in forming creation, and he continues to work in ordering and sustaining it, remaining involved in the world he made and in the lives of those who bear his image. God was the first worker. In Garden City, John Mark Corner contrasts this God of the Hebrew scriptures with the gods described in other ancient literature. Those gods despised work. Humans were made essentially to serve as slave labor for those wicked deities. But the God of Genesis, a creator, an artist, a maker, took delight in his work. In making man and woman in his image, God bestowed on them, on all of us, the honor and responsibility of being his co-creators and partners, Comer says in ruling over the earth. Not only that, but because we were made in his likeness, human beings are the visible representation in the world of the invisible God. We are called to present God in and to the world. This is the first calling of every human being, to bear witness to the God who created the world. We are all called to this work. God's original design for humanity remains even today. Everything we do represents God, whether ill or well. I love the way John Milton in Paradise Lost imagines the work Adam and Eve did in Eden before the fall. Now, some of Milton's theology, not to mention his anthropology, is questionable, but his theology of work displayed in this poem is beautiful. In writing an epic poem that portrays humanity's expulsion from the garden, Milton imaginatively expands the spare details provided in just a few chapters of Genesis into an entire volume, 12 books of blank verse. Milton's description of Adam and Eve in Eden reminds us that work, according to the biblical narrative, was not a result of the fall, but part of paradise itself. But work done in a context of abundance, which is how Milton portrays the pre-fallen garden, differs from the labor required within a place of scarcity. Thus, in one passage, Adam describes the work he and Eve are about to do as our delightful task, to prune those growing plants and to tend those flowers. Later, Eve describes their efforts in even more detail. Adam, well may we labor still to dress this garden, still to tend plant, herb, and flower. Our pleasant task enjoyed, but till more hands that aid us, the work under our labor grows luxurious by restraint, what we by day lop, overgrown, or prune, or prop, or bind, one night or two with wanton growth derides, tending to wild. And such verdant environs as Eden, the fierce first humans work out to procure but to prune, not to eke out but to contain, to just tend, lop, prune, prop, and bind the wanton growth of flowers, fruit, and foliage. Once humanity falls into sin, the curse laid upon them is not labor itself, but labor accompanied by pain, whether the pangs of birth or those of thorns and thistles. When I first moved to the near tropical paradise of Virginia some years ago, I gained an entirely new perspective about the curse wrought by weeds. In Virginia, we have all the usual varieties of smaller vegetative pests: dandelions, buttercups, and crabgrass, harmless, even cute. I do tend to let buttercups run wild. But the weeds here could include hardy, sometimes gargantuan vines and stalks that will grow as tall as trees and as thick as your wrist in one season, if left unchecked. Have you ever heard of pokeweed? If not, you are blessed indeed. My gardening work consists primarily of pulling out or sawing down the plants I don't want to grow and less tending of the plants I do want to grow. Before embarking on my gardening as weeding adventures, I certainly understood the effects of sin on the world and our lives, but learning how quickly and vigorously strong weeds choke out tender beauties offered an object lesson like I never had before. The natural world visibly and tangibly displays the new supernatural realities that surround us. This phenomenon includes the way work in the fallen world is encumbered with toil and strife. The thorns, thistles, and labor pains that why thank you for uploading. Okay. I need to check. Is that on the right playlist? Yes. Okay. Just wanted to check. Okay. Cool, it is. It's on the right one. thorns, thistles, and labor pains that accompany our work today can take on any number of forms. And while too much of a good thing can present its own problems, I think most that would agree that scarcity of work, opportunities, invitations, clients, money, time, is a weed that often chokes the joy and peace out of life. Sometimes that scarcity is real, very real, but other times it is our fear of scarcity, fear that money, opportunities, relationships, or capacity will be lacking, that drives our decisions when we should be making choices based on our true calling rather than the fear of missing out. God calls us to a life of abundance, not scarcity. God's economy is based on plenitude. If we believe that, accept it, see it, and own it, how different our decisions and emotional states might be. Yet there are blessings even amid scarcity. They are just harder to recognize. Robert Hayden's poem, Those Winter Sundays, perfectly captures this. The speaker in the poem, a grown man, looks back on the work and love offered during his childhood by his father, a laborer during the week, who rose early on Sundays too because he had to rise early the other days of the week as well, to warm the house and polish his son's boots. This calling was a austere, lonesome and difficult office for the father, whose sacrifice the son didn't recognize until long after. Sundays too, my father got up early and put his clothes on in the blue-black cold. Then, with cracked hands that ached from labor in the weekday, weather made blanket feathers raise. No one ever thanked him. I'd wake and hear the cold splintering breaking. When the rooms were warm, he'd call, and slowly I would arise and dress, fearing that the chronic angers of that house, speaking indifferently to him, who had driven out the cold and polished my good shoes as well. What did I know of love's astir and lonely offices? Much had been said in recent years about the crisis of manhood, particularly for men who are coming of age within a rapidly changing world, in which work, roles, and family relationships are shifting underfoot like quicksand. In their search for significance, some young men, and women too, have turned increasingly to internet stars, celebrity gurus, famous new converts to Christianity, and the like as role models and inspiration. Most of the work by such people will not last, however. Hayden's poems offers a contrasting picture of the kind of work, often austere, lonely, and thankless, that will bear fruit for generations to come. There will always be work to do. God works. He made us as creatures designed to join him in his work here on earth. As Ben Witherington notes in Work, a Kingdom Perspective on Labor, there will also be work to do in the new heaven and the new earth, just as there was in the first paradise. The prophet Isaiah says that some of the future work will entail beating swords into plowshares and spears into pruning hooks, as well as building houses and planting vineyards. Witherington opens his book by quoting the beginning of a poem by Emily Dickinson in which she contemplates work and the workers that might be part of the afterlife. Here is the poem in its entirety. What is paradise? Who live there? Are they farmers? Do they hoe? Do they know that this Amherst and that I am coming too? Do they wear new shoes in Eden? Is there always pleasant there? Wouldn't they scold us when we're homesick or tell God how cross we are? You are sure there's such a person as a Father in the sky, so if I get lost there ever, or do what the nurse calls die, I shan't walk the jasper barefoot, ransom folks won't laugh at me. Maybe Eden ain't so lonesome as New England used to be. Dickinson wonders if the inhabitants of heaven will be workers doing the kind of work they did on earth, farmers who hoe. Her use of quotation marks with various words throughout the poem suggests the emblematic nature of those images. If this world, New England, is a picture of the next world, then the death that will bring her to New Eden will be a kind of work to do. Someone in heaven will be making shoes. Because of their work, she won't have to walk barefoot on the jeweled streets of the New Jerusalem. Jasper is one of those precious stones mentioned in the new heavenly city described in Revelation 21. A city, of course, is a place made by human work, although even nature and gardens require work to make the country hospitable and beautiful to human creatures, as Adam and Eve well knew. The biblical narrative begins in a garden and ends in a city. Christians sometimes get caught up in debates about which of these settings in this life is ideal and which is the more important place to serve people and build God's kingdom. These are the wrong questions. Some are called to the city, some are called to the country, and some to the places in between. The Bible makes that clear that there is good work to do everywhere. Proverbs 31 paints another beautiful picture of work. While this passage is too commonly characterized as portraying a certain kind of woman, the verses are better read as description of the way any virtuous person works. The passage celebrates good work done well. The woman described is the personification of wisdom, which is a central theme throughout the book of Proverbs. She is, as Old Testament scholar Dominic Hernandez puts it, the exemplar of wisdom for all people. The work of wisdom described in Proverbs 31 is not only varied but also integrated into a holistic and well-rounded life. There is no division between public and private or between sacred and secular. Wisdom's work takes place in the marketplace and in the home. Her work blesses the community and her family alike. Most importantly, she serves the Lord in it all. Her good work will bring her praise at the city gate. This description is one all of us should aspire to and is pursuing the good, true, and beautiful in our work. The way in which Proverbs 31 integrates work done in public and private, as well as work done for the community and the family, is worth particular attention, for the passage portrays it all as worship. Dorothy Sanders addresses this all-encompassing vision of labor in her iconic essay, Why Work? She writes there, "It is the business of the church to recognize that the secular vocation as such is sacred. The church, Sanders agrees, ought not concede to the wrong-headed worldly idea that one's life is divided into the time he spends on his work and the times he spends in serving God. He must be able to serve God in his work, and the work itself must be accepted and respected as the medium of divine creation." This evocative term and phrase deserves more attention. Work is the medium of divine creation. This means that God creates through our work. Obviously, Sanders is not saying that this is the only way God creates, but that this is just one way he creates. When was the last time you thought of your work as the medium, the paint, the film, the ink, the lead, the stage, the viola, the field, the boardroom, the Zoom call, the dough, the sewing machine, the knitting needles, the laptop, for God's creative activity? When was the last time you thought of yourself as an artist, even the most mundane and ordinary daily work? You are his hands and feet. He works through you. He creates through you. That is our calling, co-creation, writes Magdalene Engel. Every single one of us, without exception, is called to co-create with God. Last summer, when my mother was dying, but we didn't yet realize it, my friend Melissa stopped by to visit and bring my father tomatoes from her garden. My father loves a good tomato. He insists you cannot find a good one in the grocery store. As we were chatting, the subject of this book came up, and Melissa talked about all the things people do in pursuit of their callings. And some people, my father said quietly, grow tomatoes. This, too, is co-creation. Co-creation is perhaps the most fruitful reading of Lady Wisdom in Proverbs 31. Through her works, the Lord's work is done. She is, like the church itself, Christ's bodily presence in the world, making him known through her wise, gracious, good work. In the Elixir, 17th century poet-priest George Herbert describes work done for God as the secret formula that gives meaning to all of our work. An elixir was once thought to be a magical ingredient by which alchemists could turn base metal into gold. Such a potion does not exist, of course, but Herbert takes that mythical idea and applies it to the transformation that can happen even with our meanest work when it is done for thy sake. Teach me, my God and King, in all the things thee to see, and what I do in anything to do it as for thee, not rudely as a beast to run into an action, but still to make thee prepossess and give it his perfection. A man that looks on glass, on it may stay his eye, or if he please it, though it pass, and then the heavens espy. All may of thee partake, nothing can be so mean, which for his teniture, for thy sake, will not grow bright and clean. A servant with this cause makes drudgery divine, who sweeps a room as for thy laws makes that and thy action fine. This is the famous stone that turneth all to gold, for that which God doth touch and own cannot for less be told. Devoting our work to God's purpose is the famous stone that turns it all to gold. Rather than looking at our work, we can look through it as we look through a glass window, in order to see what God is doing through us for his kingdom. But notice that the poets begin by imploring God, teach me. Seeing our work in this way does not come naturally or easily, but when we learn to see through our labor to see more of him, he makes drudgery divine. Even the work of sweeping a room becomes fine. Human beings will always have work. It is part of the human condition. Work itself is a good that is part of God's original design and therefore contributes to human flourishing. And while work and calling do overlap at times, they are not the same, as I will keep repeating throughout these pages. Perhaps recognizing how they are different can help us appreciate what is and what role each has in our individual lives and in our communal life together. We were created to work just as our Creator works, and that work will be part of the new heaven and the new earth. Understanding that can give us the perspective that work will never end, not because it's bad, but because it's good. Even so, the nature, meaning, and role of work shift due to the changes that take place within larger social frameworks, even from one generation to the next. Moreover, there are infinite kinds of good work we might do. Having many possibilities is liberating, but anyone who has experienced the fear of missing out or analysis paralysis knows it can be crippling too. Life in the modern world is characterized by, among other things, an increased sense of individual agency and responsibility for our lives compared to previous times. This increased sense of responsibility makes our decisions around work more fraught and anxious in a way our ancestors, who had few or no choices, did not experience. The medieval person born into a peasant family and their peer born into royalty knew their callings. Most of us today don't, at least not at first. Perhaps not ever. The Protestant work ethic that in many ways brought about this modern condition, in which we believe we bear the ultimate responsibility for our work and therefore for the outcome of our lives, sought to erase the false distinction between secular and sacred vocations. As Sawyer explains in the passage above, this is a good and right understanding. Paradoxically, however, this same idea has contributed to the erasure of the concept of vocation altogether. The Reformation's emphasis on the significance of all types of work created new social and economic opportunities for work. What resulted were conditions in which one's labor could generate economic benefits for oneself, not only for one's lords and rulers. Work undertaken for self-interest naturally leads to motivation to work harder and better, a phenomenon that in great part defines the modern condition and the rise of modern individual. Work in such cultural circumstances becomes not merely a necessary calling based on the circumstances of one's birth, but also an opportunity for advancement and improvement. Daniel Defoe's 1722 novel Moll Flanders illustrates the changing work of nature in the modern age. This fictional story is presented as a true memoir of a woman who, born in a Newgate prison to a convict, scrambles her way through life via her own pluck and resourcefulness. This story centers on the various kinds of work Moll does, much of it illegal, in order to survive and ultimately thrive. She reaches the end of her life wealthy and P-E-N-I-T-E-N-T, having employed herself among the way as a servant, mistress, swindler, and thief. Defoe shows how Moll understands herself and the conditions of her life in the language she uses to describe her work. She softens the criminal aspects of her career by using EUPHEMICTIC language. She calls her fortrays out onto the city streets to steal adventurous excursions or taking a walk. She describes skills in robbery as an art, a craft, and the trade, and she calls her fellow thieves artists. Now, Defoe is making a great deal of social and religious commentary in this story, much of which exceeds my purposes here. But what we can see happening through Moll's narrative, one in which she pulls herself up by her own as well as others' bootstraps, is that work becomes connected to personal, social, and economic improvement rather than being strictly an answer to a vocational call. Interestingly, there is a moment in the story when Moll hears the audible call of one of her several serial husbands calling for her to return to him, and she does. Defoe, it is relevant to note, was a Puritan, specifically a Presbyterian, who held a number of political and business positions as he struggled throughout his life, sometimes unsuccessfully, to keep himself out of the debtor's prison. Okay, and that is 17 pages